Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me. This is Studying the Bible with Brother Bolin. I want to continue my discussion of the counterculture of the 1960s. Yesterday, we learned that the counterculture of the 1960s was not a spontaneous event, simply meaning that it was not something that a bunch of young people got together and said, you know, hey, we're going to rebel against our parents. We're going to rebel against the church. We're going to rebel against established authority. That's not what happened. The counterculture of the 1960s, we learned yesterday, and I purported yesterday, was a planned event. It was planned. It was planned by certain groups that we're going to talk. One of the groups we're going to talk about today, but it was planned by certain groups in order to destroy America from within. That was the goal. And we learned yesterday that in the counterculture of the 1960s, it basically spawned different movements. We learned that it spawned the gay rights movement. We learned that it spawned the feminist movement. We learned that it spawned the civil rights movement. And let me say something about the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement was a legit movement. It was a movement basically trying to fight for the civil rights of blacks all over the country. And it was a legitimate movement. However, the civil rights movement itself was also, many of those particular factions were also infiltrated by some very subversive groups, such as communist fronts from Cuba and Russia and even China. But we're going to get into that in a later video. But the counterculture of the 1960s spawned these different groups. Feminism, it spawns feminism. All these different groups were brought about during the 1960s counterculture. But we learned that the counterculture, before I get into any detail about these movements, we learned that the counterculture was not a spontaneous event. It was planned. It wasn't a bunch of kids getting up and saying, I'm tired of listening to my parents, and I'm tired of going to school, and I'm tired of the government, and I'm tired of Christianity, established Christianity. No, it was planned. It was planned. Now, what we want to talk about today is I want to talk about one of the institutions that basically was used to destroy America from within. But before I give that institution's name, always remember this. I'm going to want to keep repeating this. Always remember that it's not flesh and blood that we wrestling with. It's principalities, spiritual wickedness in high places. So the spiritual wickedness in high places, demonic forces in high places in the invisible realm that exists all around us are using these physical institutions to manifest. So our real battle for the Christians is in the spiritual invisible realm. But the physical three-dimensional realm is what they use to manifest, which basically means that you can't separate the spiritual from the physical. In other words, we can't just go around keep constantly saying, well, this is spiritual, this is spiritual, this is spiritual, and not be familiar with the physical three-dimensional tactics that the enemy uses. The Apostle Paul said in 2 Corinthians 11th chapter, we are not ignorant of Satan's devices. A device is the physical means by which Satan and the demonic forces use to manifest. What I'm going to mention throughout these videos in dealing with the counterculture of the 1960s is the three-dimensional physical devices that Satan was and is using to manifest his power in his country and to manifest his tactics in destroying this country. Okay, so always remember it's a spiritual battle that we're in, but that this spiritual battle uses tactics in the physical realm to manifest. So we need to be familiar with both the spiritual aspects, and we need to also be familiar with the physical aspects that the enemy uses. We are not ignorant of his devices, or we ought not be. That's one of the purposes of these videos. Now, what I want to talk about today is one of the institutions that basically whose intention was to destroy America from within, and that the spiritual forces were using this institution to destroy America from within, and that is the Frankfurt School of Marxism, the Frankfurt School of Marxism. Now, the Frankfurt School of Marxism was a school of philosophical thought that was located in Frankfurt, Germany, okay? And where actually it originated, according to historians, it was created in Russia in the 1920s. And then the Frankfurt School professors and the school itself, in terms of its philosophies, migrated to Germany, okay? And Frankfurt, Germany, rather, and there they maintained their status. The Frankfurt School of Marxism is a school of philosophical thought that basically was based on the creator of communism, Karl Marx, whose philosophy was that Karl Marx believed that there was the rich and the poor, that the rich oppressed the poor, and that the reason why the poor was because the rich was oppressing them. Karl Marx, the founder of communism and the writer of the Communist Manifestos, or the co-writer of the Communist Manifestos in 1848, believed that all societies are made up of rich and poor, and what he called the bourgeois, and I forget the other term he uses, but the rich and the poor basically is what he believed. And so therefore, in order to bring about equality in society, what Karl Marx believed, one had to basically by force take the property and the riches from those who are rich, by force, not by persuasion, but by force. Okay. And Karl Marx for one, he was a philosopher, a political activist, a writer, and a scientist. And he co-wrote the Communist Manifestos in 1848 with a friend of his by the name of Engels. Both of these individuals believe that all societies are made up of the rich and the poor, and that the rich are the oppressors and the poor are the oppressed, and that therefore, in order to make things better for the poor had to rise up against the rich and forcefully, by force and murder if necessary, forcefully take riches from the poor, take their property from them. This is what Karl Marx believed. It was done by violent overthrow, okay? But all communists did not agree alike. And let me explain something about communism, because I don't want to go too far. I don't want to get too far ahead here. Let me explain what communism is. Communism, which was created by Karl Marx, is a political movement or political ideology that's essentially where the government has control over all means of production in a country, over all means of all the money, the production, healthcare. The government controls and owns it all. There's no free market in communism. The government controls every aspect of your life. And the idea of communism is that everyone in that particular country shares their goods. No one owns their own property. The government owns your property, and you're to share that property with everyone else. That's the idealistic concept. However, if you study the history of communism, you'll understand that in every communist country, Russia, China, Cuba, Vietnam, and others, hundreds of millions of people were slaughtered and starved to death. Now, I'm not going to go too far into that. That's a whole nother story. But get this, communism is a tool of Satan. It is demonic. Now, Karl Marx, by the way, also was an atheist. And in some reports some reports state he was an atheist, but it also states that he was a Satanist, that he posed as an atheist to keep people blinded from his true source of inspiration. But he was actually, according to some historians, a Satanist. But anyway, let's go forward. The Frankfurt School of Marxism differed from Karl Marx's ideology. The Frankfurt School of Marxism believed that the best way to bring in communism in a country, okay, was through changing that culture. This was known as cultural Marxism. So they believed that the best way to change a culture into accepting communism, all right, and the communist government taking over, you had to change the people's minds and attitudes about communism. Okay. So they believed in using the term cultural Marxism. They believed in using that method of changing the belief systems of that country in order to get people to accept communism and reject their own belief systems, so that when the communist revolutionaries take over, it would be easier for them. They would just submit to it, because after all, communism is the best way to go. Okay, so this was what the Frankfurt School of Marxism was all about. They believed in bringing in communism in countries through quiet, soft means. Okay, this is also called a quiet revolution. A quiet Marxist revolution. All right. Now, having explained that, the Frankfurt School of Marxism, like I said, was created in the 1920s in Russia. They migrated to Germany. in the late 1920s, early 1930s. But Hitler was ruling Germany at the time. So, and Hitler hated anyone who didn't believe the way he believed. He would persecute him. So the Frankfurt School Marxists, get this now, the Frankfurt School Marxist professors, okay, migrated to America in the 1930s. They brought their philosophies with them. And by the way, too, let me explain this too. The Frankfurt School Marxists were atheists. And one of their main tenets, one of their main hatreds was a hatred towards God. But we're going to get into that. Atheists who hated God. So you already know we're starting off on the wrong foot. So because of this possibility of persecution in Frankfurt, Germany from Hitler, the Frankfurt School professors migrated to America in the 1930s. They began to fill certain colleges and universities all over the country. Columbia University, Yale University, I think it was Yale and Columbia, and a couple of others I can't remember. But they were placed strategically in universities all over America. They were assisted by a man by the name of John Dewey. John Dewey, the 1930s, is considered to be the father of progressive education in America. John Dewey was an embracer and supporter of communism. And it is said by historians that he went to communist Russia, learned how the communists taught the young people in communist Russia, and then came back to America with those and adopted those same communist ideologies for the American school system. And as I said, he's known as the father of progressive education in America. But that's another story. We might get into that in a later video. Remember, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, spiritual wickedness in high places. Okay. The demonic forces are using these words, are using these institutions to manifest themselves in order to destroy America. So the Frankfurt School of Marxism migrated here in the 1930s. John Dewey helped assist these Frankfurt School professors, and he strategically placed them in different schools all over the country. So they took their belief systems and began to teach these belief systems to the students that were coming to these universities all over America. Now you may ask, what was their belief systems? They had beliefs. Number one, they were atheists. So that and they hated God. Okay. Now these Frankfurt School Marxists had goals. Number one, the goal was to destroy Christianity in America, destroy the family in America, destroy patriotism in America. Patriotism is a love for the country, and destroy family, destroy Christianity, and destroy patriotism. So we'll deal with those three goals. Those were their three main goals. They used a method known as critical theory in the school systems. All over America, they use a method known as critical theory. Critical theory. But tell you what, I'm not going to go no further than that. I'm going to leave it right there. They use a method known as critical theory in order to dismantle Christianity, dismantle the family, and dismantle a love for this country. We're going to continue this discussion tomorrow. We're going to continue this discussion tomorrow, and we're going to pick up where we left off today, dealing with critical race theory from the Frankfurt School of Marxism. But what I wanted you to know today, that the Frankfurt School of Marxism is was one of the institutions that migrated here the professors migrated here to America in order to destroy America from within. I've already told you their three main goals: to destroy the family, destroy Christianity, and destroy patriotism or nationalism, which is a love for the country. Look at where we are today. Does the bell starting to ring? Is the light starting to, you starting to see the light now? So tomorrow we're going to continue this discussion on the Frankfurt School of Marxism and exactly how they use this method of critical theory. And we're going to get into some other things too. You'll find out. We'll find out. So I hope you all have learned something from just this introduction of the Frankfurt School of Marxism. Tune in tomorrow as we expand on this concept and this institution known as the Frankfurt School of Marxism. If you like this video, press the like button, share this video, leave your comments, and give your views on what I just shared with you. And I will see you guys tomorrow. God bless you all.